Hello everyone, my name is Bhavesh Acharya. I am the Chief Operating Officer at SiteSpace Research Private Limited. I've been working in clinical research from last little more than 22 years now. So first of all, my sincere thanks to SCDM for providing me this opportunity to share experience of clinical trial sites in this COVID world. And also to pick some opportunities to see how these learnings from the clinical trial sites can be implemented to accelerate decentralized clinical trials. So standard disclaimer, this presentation is based on the observations made at clinical trial sites in India and publicly available data. The view presented are the viewers of the presenter, not necessarily those of SiteSpace Research. And the content of this deck is accurate to the best of presenter's knowledge at the time of production. So before I begin, I hope that you and your near and dear ones are safe as we are passing through this unprecedented healthcare crisis of humankind. The sharing that I would like to really do here is in two parts. So one are the general observations that we have made at clinical trial sites, and then specific to the clinical trials, how it has impacted. So if we really see what has happened at the clinical trial site, right? So the footfall of patients to hospitals have drastically reduced. So patients decided to delay the routine medical checkup, treatment, surgeries, because of course of lockdown, as well as the fear of cross-infection of COVID-19 as well. And the entire attention of the healthcare staff was rerouted on COVID-19 treatment, then on, you can say, less non-emergency treatment, because during the lockdown, it was all closed, including the OPDs. Most of the sites and the ethics committees refused to take up new studies. And then we saw some exceptions of COVID-19 studies coming up. The good thing is that then we have started seeing a lot of COVID-19 studies, which are either drug or vaccine. In fact, you go to clinicaltrials.gov, you will find little more than 2,000 clinical trials that are registered for COVID-19. And we also see a little bit of upside on the observational trials as well. And I'm going to speak about why it is relevant that we have got the observational clinical trials happening at this point in time. Of course, all the feasibilities that we were doing at clinical trial sites either stopped or all the ongoing feasibilities got delayed. All the site selection visits, initiation visit, site monitoring visit, closeout visit, either they put on hold or they postponed it. And that is where we started realizing that we are into a new normal, because a lot of our customers did not have SOPs to perform virtual site selection visit or site initiation visit or the in fact site closeout visit. So those were our initial generic observation. And then talking about the sites, so if you really see the sites now, so the entire thought process at the clinical trial sites was what will happen to the new screening or the randomization, because that stopped. And the patient in screening were discontinued from the study because of obvious reason, because we weren't sure of the supply chain of IP or of the lab samples, because it really got impacted, both of them. And we, from our side, also wanted to ensure that how can we ensure that the patient perspective, their safety, we do not want them to participate in the study and then realize that we are not being able to give them the IP, right? So we put them onto standard of care or any alternative treatment that were kind of available. And then the entire focus was now on to say existing patients. So what we will do with these existing patients? So our thought process was the first, how can we ensure patient safety? So we have done risk assessment in coordination with customers to say how we are going to do a risk assessment of these patients to ensure that safety is not being compromised. A regular communication with all the patients in the clinical trial about COVID infections, or to ensure that, we tell them that don't worry, because imagine that they are into double-blind study, right? And they do not know which medication they are taking, nor the investigators know what medication are they are taking. So we really wanted to ensure that we have that close communication with them, so that they understand that there is a continued support that is being provided by the site. And then about the continuation of IP, to say, hey, how we are going to ensure that there is no gap in the IP that they are taking. Then on the safety assessment, right, we had to ensure that the lab results are okay so that they can continue the IP. If at all there are any radiological assessments that are to be done, then how we are going to go about it. And after doing all these things, the biggest challenge was how we are going to ensure that the documentation is according to the good clinical practice. So the data integrity is appropriately protected for them. And one of the interesting things that we have observed is a lot of customers have started thinking about a lot of patient visit to say, do we really need these visits? If there is no impact on the primary endpoint, can we reduce the number of visits? So these were other thoughts which really made us thinking that now we are getting onto the path wherein we are really started thinking about patients. And I would say very timely, US FDA released its first guidance in March 2020. And then as latest as 11th of May 2020, they released the guidance, followed by EMA and the DCGI in India as well, they've released. So that really kind of, helped us reassure that we are on the right track with patient safety and data integrity. So how the patient visits management were managed. So if you really see the patient at clinical trial sites, right? So we call the patient to say, can you visit the site? If patient says yes, then of course CRC will have to confirm from subject that, are there symptoms of COVID-19 or not? If the patient is saying, no, we cannot visit the site because of the lockdown, because of some other reasons, then what we had done was we arranged teleconsultation, and we wanted to ensure that how can we provide IP to the patient. So the oral IP, then we managed to do the dispensation at the home. So the CRC went to the patient house and dispensed the medications. How can we give vaccine at home? So a lot of trials, vaccine trials, home health services were used to ensure that how vaccines are being administered at home, and also the infusion at home, and the radiological and the lab assessment. So that is how the teleconsultation was used to ensure that we conduct this virtual visit. And I'm going to share with all of you what are the learnings that we got out of these activities one by one. Now, if the subject is coming to the site and not having any COVID-19 symptoms, then the business is as usual, the CRC to plan the on-site visit. Of course, we will have to prepare ourselves for this patient visit by following the hospital COVID protocol, by ensuring that we have got the PPE kit that is being kind of used by the site staff while attending the patient. And also a lot of support that was provided to patients in terms of getting the e-pass because it was the lockdown. So how can we ensure that we help these patients by providing some letters to say that it's a clinical trial patient and it is an emergency for them to visit the site to collect the medications. And that is how the patient visit was conducted. Now we have also had situations wherein the patient said that no, they've got COVID-like symptoms as well. Then we advise patient to say, please go to the nearby COVID center for test and provide site with an update. So if it is negative with COVID-19, then follow the same process of bringing a patient to the site to conduct the visit. If COVID-19 is positive, then of course we'll have to report adverse event and decide on continuation of IP, or probably think of unblinding as well, whether we will end up doing the unblinding of the study and then again conduct the virtual visit rather than bringing that patient to the site. Now, if we really look at the entire methodology, that is happening at the clinical trial sites, right? The focus is only site. So our traditional method of clinical trial is site is an integral part of the study. So we do speak about patient centricity. However, if we really look at the sequence of events that happen at clinical trial sites while participating, it is mainly site that is in the center of everything that we do. So look at here. So it is sponsor and CRO that is talking with the site, and then the vendor is talking with the sponsor and CRO, and then to the site. And all activities, including patients, consenting, screening activities, lab sampling, documentation, monitoring activities, everything is focused on site. And I think one of the biggest learning in this was patients stopped coming at the site, right? And hence what happened is all these activities that we were doing at the site did not happen. And that was the huge impact, I would say. And then we realized that though we talk about patient centricity, however, our model continue to be site centric. So this is really an opportunity for all of us in clinical research to think as to how we can really make patient an integral part of the study and create truly patient-focused drug development. So if you look at the patient, if that is an integral part of the study, then what happens, right? Then the same thing, however, now patient is in the core, and then all the activities that are happening around is on patient. So you see, now the focus is from site to patient. So when we are saying decentralized clinical trial does not mean that we really want to not have the sites, but it is just to say that how we can go near to the patient and still ensure that the patient safety and data integrity is protected, which is nothing but accuracy of the data, consistency of the data, and the authenticity of the data is not being compromised. So let me share with you the specific learnings, what happened at the site. So the teleconsultation, and again, I'm just going to capture a few of these. I'm sure there are a lot of dimensions of decentralized clinical trials that one can think of, but I'm just trying to capture a few which are specifically learnings from the site and how this learning can be implemented. So if you see teleconsultation, so the electronic consent were used in COVID studies. So this is a long pending thing for all of us in the clinical research, the e-consenting. So we had an excellent opportunity to utilize e-consenting for a lot of COVID studies. And the best part that we liked is that the patients could discuss this with relatives and friends before taking any decision. And they got enough time to think. And what we found is the e-consenting was very interactive than the traditional thinking that no, if the patient is face-to-face, then it is easier. Virtually, it is very difficult. However, our experience has been that it was very good to see the teleconsultation happening from investigators to patient, and that there was more participation from patient as well as from patient's relative. All the assessments as per the protocol were performed except for the radiological assessment because protocol did not allow, and I'm sure there is an opportunity to work through that as well. Compliance to the IP and concomitant medications were checked. And that was a very important exercise. So the appropriate documentation was done. And we asked patient to visit the nearby accredited lab, because it is always an insistence that no, even for basic laboratory tests, patient will have to come to the hospital at a site, take the sample, and it will go to the central laboratory. And I'm not saying that is not appropriate. My only limited submission is we have an opportunity to utilize laboratories that are near to patient's house, that are also accredited, that has been assessed by the sponsor to ensure that that lab meets the requirement of the protocol as well. And of course, through teleconsultation, we provided regular consultation to patient about COVID signs and symptoms, what are the precautions that are to be taken to ensure that the patient is safe. One of the challenges that we found in this is the cross consultation. And I probably think that that is an opportunity. I'm not saying that it is not possible in the newer technology of teleconsultations, but it is just an opportunity for us to say how kind of we can make this process more seamless to manage patient and its documentation when you would like to refer it to some other department as well. So in hospital setup, it is easy. However, when you're doing teleconsultation, if the diabetic patient will have to see the cardiologist, or if the diabetic patient will have to see the ophthalmologist, how those things can be arranged. And I'm sure with newer teleconsultation technology, it will be easier for us to do it in near future. Let's talk about the IP dispensation. So it was pretty smooth in terms of the IVR or IWRS was performed by the delegated study team members from the site, and IP was dispensed, as I briefly mentioned. So either the CRC went to patient's home to dispense the medication, or with the customer support, we could also arrange courier service and obtain acknowledgement of the IP. Of course, dosing instructions were provided by the study team virtually through video calls, including confirmation of the used and unused IP at home, and then the appropriate documentation of that was done. And we really could see a huge opportunity to continue many of these practices, to say how the oral IP, or in fact the vaccines, can be administered at patient's home. In fact, the systematic IP as well, how that can be administered at home. If it is oncology medications, probably understand that how we will manage the adverse event. So you may want to use the nearby medical facility, but there are opportunities to do that as well. And how can we make use of the home health services? Because they can do, a nurse or a phlebotomist or a doctor can visit patient's home, can do vitals, blood draw, routine assessment, and even the IP dispensation and administration as well. Of course, we'll have to ensure that the blinding is maintained all the time. So we are not kind of playing with blinding. So that is to be ensured as we implement this process. The radiological or laboratory tests. So as I mentioned, we quite successfully utilized the local accredited laboratories were considered in terms of performing protocol specific tests, and those reports were sent to the PI or the POI, and necessarily medical advices were given and appropriately documented. For significant lab values, again, teleconsultation was organized, adverse events were assessed through a set of questions. So that was also an important exercise, talking with the doctor to say how we are going to evaluate adverse events. So what kind of questions that we can ask to get more accurate information from patients or from patients' family members. And those questionnaires were applied in asking those questions to patients so that we could get information to document the adverse event or propose a course of action to the patient. And the central laboratory again. So if there is an insistence from the sponsor that no, we would like to use our central laboratory kit, then one of the things that we are also speaking with few of the customers to say, hey, rather than sending these kits to the site and then to the patient, are there opportunities for us to ship directly the central laboratory kits directly to patient's home? And then you have a support of home healthcare service or logistic companies to support, and the blood draw can be done by using those central lab kits at patient's home rather than bringing patients to the site. Other thing is also the huge opportunity to utilize point of contact devices, and we firmly believe that there is a huge opportunity to use POC devices. It is, immediately the results can be given. I'm sure there are encrypted point of care test platforms for blinded studies that can be taken care of. And also the POC devices, not only in terms of enrolling the patients. It can also be used in terms of pre-screening patients. So how can we use POC devices, like say if it is a cardiovascular study and we implement POC device to check either the cholesterol level or any other parameters to check whether these are the right patients that we are enrolling into the study or not. One could use POC devices, pre-screen a lot of patients, and then get to the patients that are really eligible to go to the next level. So these are the few observations that we have made at the site. This was a big eye-opener in terms of real-world data. So what we have seen is large amount of real-time data are being collected for COVID-19 studies, and I'm sure it's not only us, it is all of you would have observed that there are a lot of papers that are getting published for the real-time data, and no wonder there are more than 2,000 protocols, or I would say studies, that are registered at clinicaltrials.gov is only because we could understand about COVID-19 much more than a lot of diseases which are there for years. And that is where we thought it's a great opportunity to look at clinical trial data, as well as how can we look at genomics data, the wearable devices, socioeconomic, behavioral data, and use more of e-patient diaries, not only for COVID then, but for other medical conditions as well. And with this, we'll really be able to use this data in a much better way to link the real world data sources with the other sources, right? So how can we submit this real world evidences to the regulatory assessment, which will really create the holistic view of patient health and hence opportunity to bring drug faster to the market, right? So the learning was like the more real world evidences and surveillance, how can we do that? Now, this is the challenge that we have always talked about, patient centricity and the industry challenges, right? So this is an interesting article that I was reading to say there is no significant difference in mean number of patients enrolled per site or even per therapeutic area in 2019 versus 2012. It means, in the last 7 years, we are still facing the same trouble of 80% of the trials delayed due to enrollment, 11% of sites enroll 0 patients, and I'm not yet talking about sites that just recruit 1 patient. 49% of dropout before study completion, 40% of phase 3 patients become disengaged or drop out at some point in time during the conduct process. And 49% of sites fail to meet enrollment goals. And this is the challenge. So one side, we are speaking about patient centricity. We are implementing more and more technology to see to that how we can go virtual. At the same time, the patient centricity remains the core. So not going to get into the details, as we know that the patient centricity is the key, because there are more than enough material available out in the market to say if patient centricity clinical trials are implemented, then you could enroll double the number of patients in half of the time, or the chances of such drug getting launched is very high. So sometimes I wonder that is excess use of technology hampering patient enrollment? And I'm not saying that we should not be using technology. However, at the same time, the technology should not be burdensome to the patient. So technology should be simple, but powerful as well, so that you can connect with patients well, rather than it is being seen as burden for patient, right? So look out for the opportunity to improve technology that is patient savvy and less burden for the patients. And I personally think that COVID-19 is really bringing pivotal opportunity to accelerate innovations on patient engagement to avoid these traditional challenges that we have been facing now and then. So taking the patient centricity forward, when we say patient centricity, it is not only limited to only that clinical trial protocol when it is getting implemented. Honestly, it is engaging and supporting patient throughout the drug development cycle by incorporating their inputs at every stage of the trial. So when I say every stage, it starts from pre-study, right? So the study design, how can we have study design with patient-centric protocol optimization? How can we have more adaptive trial designs? How can we ensure that during the development of the protocol, we consider that the ease of patient burden is being considered? And that is extremely important when we speak about that. And patient must be part of the protocol thinking all the time, right? So what we have seen is when we have the trial design, too often does not take into the account of patient burden when dealing with medical conditions or diseases. And you can only find that out in clinical setting after the commercialization. And that puts a lot of burden on patient and its ability, so the drug's ability to reach out to more number of patients as well, because now you are seeing these challenges in clinical setting after commercialization, whereas we could have found these things out at the time of implementing clinical trial. During study conduct, how can we reduce visit burden? So how can we promote convenience and ease of use for patient? As I said, by using bright technology and home care at patient's home, and also promote more touch points to improve engagement. Because what happens is, as we have seen, right, like 40% of the patient becomes disengaged or gets drop out in phase 3 kind of trials. So with such touch points, you're really keeping patients engaged throughout the study, and you create a two-way communication. I think clinical trial is always been data collection from patients, and rightly so, there is no doubt about it. However, there are opportunities for us to give it back to the patient as well. How can we on an ongoing basis share information to patient so that they remain engaged as well, right? Post-study, how can we share data with patients so that they know that what is working for them, what is not working for them? And who knows, probably that can help them decide on the next clinical trial which they want to participate as well. And let's demonstrate the value and support evidence generation as well, right? And of course, one can do the market access and beyond, right? So in short, how can we enhance the clinical trial experience to improve patient safety? And that is what has happened. Like, patient must be part of endpoint discussion that determine what will be studied. And also, let's understand the patient needs, views, and experiences of patients, and through the advocacy group as well. Let's not undermine the advocacy group. So let's understand from advocacy group as well to ensure that we keep thinking of patients all the time. So if we really look at what are the consideration for the decentralized clinical trial, if I want to sum this up, one is the number of touch points that we'll have to have in terms of ensuring that the patient is engaged, including convenience and ease of use. How can we ensure that we are deploying the home healthcare, right? And we have seen a lot of home healthcare companies, at least in India, and I'm sure it is quite matured in the Western world, in US and Europe as well. How can we make use of these home healthcare services so that we don't bring patient to the site, but we bring clinical trial study to patient's home, and provide home pickup and drop services. I think that is also because many a times patients are not being able to come to the site because they are either far or they are having problem with the commutation or conveyance. Then I'm sure there are facilities like nowadays in Uber or in Ola in India. Those services can be arranged for patients so that such pickup and drop services are arranged for them to come to the medical facility, either to the site or to nearby medical facility. And of course, direct to patient shipment and supplies to ensure that the drug products are appropriately managed through clinical trial supplies and logistic services. And I know for sure that there are a lot of innovations that are happening, how such innovations are happening in the educational institutions as well, while providing the virtual learnings. Similar innovations are happening to ensure that the right patient is taking the medicines at a right time, and it also has ability to look at the accountability of the used as well as unused IP at patient's home as well. How can we ensure that the patient reimbursement are also managed virtually and promote remote SDV and data-driven monitoring partnership? I think that is extremely important as we are seeing more and more implementation of electronic medical record. We already see a lot of integration of e-source in kind of doing the SDV. And how can we explore remote SSV, SIV, as well as the closeout visit? That is something that is to be explored, because most of the time we are using same type of sites, right? Like we have done studies and studies and studies at those sites. So at least for those sites, we must not be going physically to assess each time when you have a new study. And I'm sure a lot of these learnings can be applied in terms of initiating the site virtually, because we have had one study wherein the local laboratory was supposed to be used. We had patients, including ethics committee approval, clinical trial agreement. However, we could not screen patient because the customer SOP says they cannot initiate the site virtually. And I'm not saying it's bad, but I'm sure with these kind of situations, now we are learning that I'm sure that there are opportunities, or SOP should be flexible enough to see to that how we can initiate the site virtually so that the patient screening can happen. And as I mentioned, large amount of real-time data, and I'm personally quite bullish about it in terms of getting more and more data. Like COVID-19, as I said, it's an example wherein we have got plethora of information about COVID-19, and hence no wonder so many clinical trials are coming up literally overnight, whether it is vaccine or drug or new drug or repurposing the existing drug, is only possible because we have understood about COVID-19 more in shortest period of time, because the data are coming directly from the patients and we are capturing that data more and more. And that is really paving the way for us to create truly a patient-focused drug development. So let us not limit ourselves only for COVID-19, but for other medical conditions as well. If we are collecting it, it is well and good. If not, how can we ensure that we use everything? We really use AI, we use blockchain, we use decentralized clinical trial, but by any means to see to that we collect more and more of this data. And of course, one of the things which I've not covered in detail, but the regulatory compliance, patient confidentiality, and privacy norms are extremely important, because at no point in time we want to prematurely get into decentralized clinical trial and by mistake we end up compromising patient confidentiality or privacy norms. So that is something that we really would like to ensure that we keep that in mind. And of course, continue to have close collaboration with regulators, with sites, and patient advocacy group. Let's not undermine the power of patient advocacy group, because they have, I would say, a lot of information that can be shared, which can be utilized during the clinical trial or before, in fact, we start the clinical trials. So as probably the existing COVID-19 virus is mutating, we will have to mutate ourselves for good to face the new world. And our post-pandemic model that we all are looking at should really be transformational. The way clinical trials are being done, rather than restarting the clinical trials from where we left. So those are the opportunities that I can see. Though, of course, this is on the very lighter note, but let's identify what are the non-essential activities that we are doing in clinical trial. Many a times we just do certain activities, as I mentioned, right? Lot of studies where we have got 1 patient or 0 patient, right? So that's a lot of, I would say, stats gap that is happening. That's a noise that is happening at a stat level, but we are not reporting that. So we are reporting what is good. We are not reporting what is not so good about it. So let us identify all those non-essential things in the entire clinical trial chain and create a new decentralized clinical trial. So that's my last slide. Thank you all very much. I hope that with this you could get some learnings from the clinical trial sites and our perspective on the decentralized clinical trials as to how we can implement few of these learnings. You can of course reach out to me through SCDM, or you can reach out to me through LinkedIn. I'll be more than happy to discuss or probably constructively debate few of the questions or query that you may have. And happy to chat. So stay safe, keep well, and thank you all very much once again.